Abundance is a nascent movement that really grows out of the Yes in My Backyard movement, which is a pro-housing movement in the United States, the YIMBY movement. It's also, I mean, folks in the UK and other areas will probably have heard of, if they're plugged into housing space, the YIMBY movement. But the idea is that like there is a need to build a lot more housing, energy, transit, a lot of just like public goods, but also just like there are many like physical infrastructure projects that we need in order to like live a good life, and like it is very difficult to build those things for a variety of reasons, but largely because of a series of regulations, anti-growth activists, and legal institutions that have made it very, very difficult to build things that everyone agrees we need, like housing, like energy, like bridges, roads, trains, etc. And so the abundance movement comes out of this idea and out of the YIMBY movement. We had the organizers of it had this big conference in DC in early September, and it happened, as you said, to be like right when the National Conservative Conference had their big conference. National Conservatives, as you mentioned, this is like really the post-liberal right. These are individuals who are not in like the traditional American conservative tradition is like a localist, anti-big government, usually religious kind of movement that doesn't want to see large amounts of government intervention in social and cultural institutions. And national conservatives are very in favor of big government. They just want big government for right-wing ends. And so I think it's honestly, even conservatism is like not even really the right word for them. It's more like just national right-wingism. so that's what that is. And it's, as I mentioned, JD Vance is a big part of this. A speech from that conference went viral. Senator Eric Schmidt gave a speech about what it means to be an American, where he essentially talked about how, it was very much like blood and soil nationalism type stuff in his speech. But they're very euphemistic, so you should go watch it yourself rather than me giving quotes. But anyway, so these happened at the same time, these two conferences, and as I'm bouncing back and forth between them, I write this piece for the argument about my experience at these conferences, and like to me, it felt like national conservatives understood very clearly that their enemy was liberalism. Like they are very clear that they are trying to destroy liberalism, to destroy these institutions of liberalism, to try to destroy the ideas that undergird them around individualism, freedom, rights of the individual to make decisions that they disagree with. That is the goal they have. And abundance, I was like, I love the people who work in this space. They're often people who are in the very local government across the country, trying to build more housing, trying to address the energy crisis, working in very, very technocratic ways to try to make the world a better place without actually getting a lot of glory. And it has always been a bipartisan movement, which I've always really loved about YIMBYism, because it's pragmatic about trying to get stuff done. Like they're trying to pass laws in Texas and in Arizona. Like you have to work with Republicans. Like it's just like you're either not going to get something done, or you're going to include Republicans. You're going to platform that you're going to make those people. Those people are going to be a big part of the genesis of that legislation. And so my piece is not at all that like Republicans or people on the right shouldn't be included, but I think that there's a difference between, to really marry my earlier conversation around not drawing lines, there's a difference between knowing what you're for and deciding you're not going to engage with people who disagree with you. I think that liberals should engage even more with the post-liberal right. I think they should be arguing with them in public. I think they should be responding to their arguments. I think they should have them on their podcast. They should go on their podcast. They should include them and debate them at their conferences. Like that's all great. Like that's fine. But I don't think I don't think abundance, a pro-growth vision of the United States of America that wants to that is trying to create abundant material well-being for like all people is actually compatible with a national conservative vision that wants to devolve power to like local communities in order to exert control over people. I don't think these things are compatible ideas. I think that like you should act like it will actually distort the movement to have that. It's like having a misogynist at a feminist conference. Like, yeah, you should debate that person and you should like engage with their ideas, but like they're not like a part of the movement, and it's weird to pretend that they are. And so that's kind of my perspective here. And I do think that like that is, that was a fun, controversial piece to put out there.
I guess to drill down a bit more on like the sort of YIMBY stuff, right? Because, this is kind of your wheelhouse. It's like a fundamentally kind of like urbanist kind of vision. The sort of narrative of like the Trump era has largely been like, getting out of cities and thinking about like suburbs and regions and these sort of like, left behind places that he is kind of like thrust into the center of like national politics, right? Now, like you live in Washington. I believe I remember you speaking on like another podcast where you spoke about like you like ride an e-bike around and stuff. And so like, I'm sort of pigeonholing you here as like a kind of urbanist YIMBY type, right? Maybe fairly, maybe not fair, I don't know, right? But like how do you see this like urban rural divide in American politics today and like the sort of implications of that? And like why are you still like bullish on like cities, basically?
No, you clocked me. It's so true. Um, I'm bullish on cities because I think that agglomeration effects are extremely valuable for economic well-being and growth. Like the reason a lot of people move to New York and to DC and to Los Angeles and San Francisco and to Seattle is because, or even in like more rural states, like they move to Indianapolis and they move to Iowa City. Like, they move towards these urban agglomerations is because for workers, it means you can exert more power by choosing between a bunch of different employers. That means you can bid up your own income. And for employers, it means it's a bigger pool of workers. So then you can like find a worker that's more specially matched for your needs. And then for other people who aren't working in these firms, like all of that agglomeration means that there's a bunch of more demand for goods and services. So like a bunch of, lawyers moving to, Washington, D.C., they need doctors, they need nurses, they need Uber drivers, they need restaurant workers, they need all of the things that people demand for the good life that they want to live is going to mean the creation of more jobs and more higher paying jobs because those people are going to be paid higher wages. And so
Yeah,
then
working from home hasn't changed that the sort of post COVID like change to hybrid working hasn't changed that dynamic in your mind.
it has a little. I mean, like there's been some unbundling for some industries and some people, but like there's a reversal happening. I think because I actually just do believe that like many companies are finding that there are productivity benefits in certain areas to having more agglomeration. But also like even if people did have like remote work, you have often hybrid work, right? Which means like, yes, like you can move a little bit further out. Maybe you move like an hour outside the city, hour and a half outside the city, 2 hours, but you're not going to move like all the way to a state where you have to like fly in or something. But also secondarily, like if you are work remote and you decide I'm going to just go move to like Montana in order to live in a beautiful ski town, what you are in essence doing is you are locking yourself in only to employers who will offer you full-time remote work, which is in essence, unless you're like an extremely high performing individual, you are cutting off a bunch of different opportunities if you're not willing to live and work in a city where they require hybrid work or full-time in-person work. So to me, I think the agglomeration effects, while weakened a little bit by remote work, are still strong. And I think they're going to come roaring back anytime soon. They're already roaring back for a lot of industries. We see this in Silicon Valley where they're all going back to like full-time in-person work. But anyway, so all these agglomeration effects, I think, are like why I'm still bullish on cities. But also, I think that yes, I am the classic urbanist. Love to be in a city, love to walk around, love to ride my e-bike. Like, yes, that is me. But I don't think that that means like I don't think that like that is who YIMBYism is for only. And the reason for that is that when you think about why you would want to create apartment buildings or condos or row houses for people like me, the reason is that if I can't find a row house or an apartment, I'm still going to live somewhere. So that means I'm going to go find and bid up the price of your single family home, even if I would prefer living in a dense urban area. And so, yes, the majority of people say they want to live in a single family home. We should have single family homes. You should build more of them. That would be great. We want to fulfill that demand. But for people like me who are excited not to live in that kind of space, who are excited to live in a condo or a row house like I live in right now, those people don't need to be adding to the demand for single family housing and therefore creating problems for the people who want to live in that suburban kind of or rural lifestyle. And I think that we're seeing this right now where the housing crisis in like a California, as people get priced out, it spreads across the country. California exported its housing crisis to Arizona, to Idaho, to Utah. The governor of Utah jokingly said, like, Californians don't come anymore. Like, we are full up and we don't have housing for you. And so the residents of Utah are now facing the demand pressure of these California residents with their higher incomes. And like, that is how it goes. Then you have this happen in small towns in Montana. You have this happen in Nashville, Tennessee. And so all these people who are like, oh, YIMBYism is just for urbanists, like if you don't let us build how we're going to live, how we want to live, then we will have to live where you want to live. And I think that's probably the best. You don't want me riding my e-bike in your small town. I promise you that.
Yeah, yeah. No, as you're saying this, I'm looking out the window of my apartment with all the Lime bikes going past, which is like now
Yeah.
a picture of London, and it's kind of the same thing. But yeah, we were talking before that we started recording about how this applies to London too, right? With like, it has such agglomeration effects, so many people coming from outside of London to live here or to like commute in because, that is the center of industry and stuff here in the UK. Now, like that has its problems, and like should there be some decentralization in the UK is like a debate you can have, right? But like the fact that London has grown largely outward rather than upward in a lot of instances like is obviously a problem that needs to be dealt with. This is kind of like a slight diversion, but like I was watching Parks and Rec the other night. If you've watched Parks and Rec, right? Like yeah. And I just sort of thought how like the sort of politics that you're talking about, like YIMBY kind of urbanism, this emphasis on like not having the government kind of get in the way of itself with like ridiculous red tape, right, is kind of the like anti Leslie Knope politics. She loves paperwork, she loves community consultation and procedure, but then like the show's taking the piss out of those things the whole time.
It's so funny because it's like, I don't get how, like, you watch that show and then you have all these community meetings where, like, the people are saying the most ridiculous things, and there's, like, the most unrepresentative person who's just, like, demanding that they tear down a park because there's mayonnaise on a sandwich that he found. Like, it's just like obviously, a level of like extreme parody, but like I don't it's so funny to watch that and to go like, "Oh yeah, but I like love this." It's like I love people who work in local government because they often are very, very like people who are willing to like work through the muck in order to get good things for their communities. But like most people in local government who I talk to are like so sick of all these processes that make their jobs harder, that make them targets of like wrath and condescension from the public. Like I wrote the story for The Atlantic a couple years ago about this guy who just got really angry that the city had planted a couple of trees on a public lot near a house that he didn't even live in. And it was just like the way that like this man ended up treating like public civil servants and taking up their time and like taking up city resources was just like so absurd to me. And it was just like, I agree. It's very anti-Leslie. I'm like, no, like these people should get to talk, but they shouldn't have more power just because they're annoying. Like I just think it's very weird. Like I had this like joke where I was like, we are incentivizing people to be Karens for like no like for no discernible reason, and like we're rewarding that behavior, and it's bad. Like I think that if someone gets to vote and they get to vote for their elected officials and they get to sign petitions and they get to protest and all of that's great, and you should do that and you should have your voice heard in that way. But like your ability to like show up at like 2 p.m. every single day at a community meeting and say the most unhinged stuff on the planet so that everyone has to pay attention to you should not be like democratically legitimate behavior, you know? So yes,
Yeah.
I'm the anti-Leslie Knope, that's true.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's like the Movember mustache, but like, yeah, I'm becoming more sympathetic to Ron Swanson as I age.
Yeah.
Um, Another massive dividing line, I guess, other than like the sort of urban-rural divide in America in politics, like probably the biggest dividing line at the moment is around like immigration and like attitudes towards immigration, right? Um, you've written about how like liberals can grapple with the backlash to Biden's immigration policies without necessarily giving in to the worst tendencies of the Trumpian right at this moment, right? This is quite relevant here in the UK as well because there's a significant backlash to the Starmer government's immigration policies, and those immigration policies haven't changed significantly from the Conservative government. Indeed, they've only tightened, but nonetheless, there's a perception that the government is sort of weak on immigration or whatever, right? Your family migrated to the US. How does your experience inform your opinions on this issue at the moment?
Yeah, so I am an Eritrean asylum seeker. So we came to the United States when I was 3 years old and from Ethiopia. And we settled in suburban Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. And it's a very diverse area in part because there's so many international workers there. So, like, I had friends growing up who were Peruvian and, El Salvadorian and Chinese and, South African, like all over the world, and it was great, and it was very, very cosmopolitan. And you know, I often don't talk a lot about my experience with this because in the context of trying to talk to people about immigration, because I think that it's often people assume that like, okay, well, you're just a bleeding heart liberal who just wants more people like you to be let into this country. And that's a fair like point. Like I'm sure I am kind of biased by the fact that I myself had this experience. And I'm like, I think it's gone quite well for me and my community that I've been able to be here. But at the same time, I think that like what has happened with immigration is that there are very legitimate concerns that people have around local costs. Like what we witnessed over the last few years was that local governments were having to pay significant resources to house immigrants who are coming to the United States, to deal with the fact that in Chicago, like there were migrants sleeping on the floors of police stations while they're trying to figure out what to do with them. Like all these sorts of things were like real legitimate concerns that people had. And then there's also concerns people have about crime. Like are people who are coming here being properly vetted to make sure there are not real public safety concerns? And that neither of those concerns like makes you like a bigot. Like you're not a bad person if you are like worried about, hey, is the government competently doing this? Why is the government incapable of making sure of managing inflows to make sure that people who are coming here are like have work permits and like are not just going to be taking money out of my local government, etc. I don't think that's per se bad. I think that like for a long time, we treated questions like that as being inherently xenophobic instead of just like responding to those questions and making sure that like you're actually addressing the concerns therein. And so my plea for liberals, I think the United States, like I'm going to speak mostly to that context. I'm more familiar with it, but like United States is a very pro-immigration country, like way more than most countries in the world, both for our own history and, we see a lot of political science research showing that like places that have received a lot of immigrants tend in future generations to be more accepting of immigrants because of that history. And so, of course, America has kind of like a long history of having those waves and waves of immigration. And so to me, like the question is, how do we reframe how we talk about immigration not as some sort of charity project that we're doing for developing nations, but as like part of a national economic strategy that we have. Like the purpose of immigration is to make sure that the US is getting the best and the brightest from around the world, that we're getting a workforce that can actually meet our needs. Like we have an aging society here. And like it is going to become a huge problem that we don't have enough people to do long-term care for the elderly, to be staff up our hospitals. We already have shortages of teachers. Like all of these things are like serious problems that are afflicting people here. And if we can assure people and that we can be clear and transparent about how much we are vetting individuals, that we are willing to deport people who are committing violent crimes, that we are willing to ensure that people who are coming here are paying their fair share in taxes, whether that means levying extra taxes on at the local level to make sure that the cost of those services is covered. Like there are things that people should be proposing and engaging with that actually address these concerns without meaning that like the answers are not just like, oh, open borders or closed borders. Like, I mean, it's like a facile way to think about the problem, particularly in the United States, which is like has a long history of being fine with immigrants. And like when you look at polling, when you look at the individuals, I mean, I wrote recently an article about this like this week about this question about like when you the public opinion on immigration in this country, you actually see very reasonable views even from many Republicans. So in when the Afghanistan withdrawal happened under Biden, which was like probably the time where his public opinion dropped and he never recovered from, 64% of Republicans said they wanted to see Afghan refugees who were um, afraid of living under the Taliban able to resettle in the United States. Like 64% of Republicans are saying this. And I just feel like there's a level to here where like, what does that tell you about the populace's willingness to engage with these questions in actual granular and nuanced ways, rather than the way that I think our public elected officials have been engaging with is just like, you're either pro-immigration or you're anti-immigration. And I think that once you start engaging in this in a much more, nuanced way where you're actually talking about specific types of immigration for specific purposes in specific ways, then you can actually have a conversation about building a pro-immigration majority.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a lot of the things that you just said there kind of, chimed with my experience of this debate in the UK, obviously. Like, so, Prospect, we ran a piece a while ago about like how the government does this sort of asylum hotel policy here, for instance. And like it's an absolute farce where like the local governments are paying out like massive amounts of money to like private contractors to like temporarily house migrants because like they don't have the housing capacity themselves, and like it's just a mess, right? So like obviously
Yeah.
like dealing with those localized impacts is gonna have a helping hand.
Yeah,
um
because
yeah.
like immigration is a net positive economically. And so like people should feel that. Like you can just create that. You can make sure that people have like a personal stake in the economic growth of their region and that it's not just sort of a diffuse inchoate feeling. And so yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, totally. And so final question, and yeah, a bit of a different one. You've written recently about becoming addicted to TikTok and eventually breaking
You're
your
outing me on
addic-
this podcast.
Sorry, yeah, yeah. I mean, look,
No,
I
it's
feel
fine.
like loads of listeners and viewers will
Everyone
relate,
is. We're
right?
all we're all addicted. Yeah.
You outed yourself by writing about it.
I
So
did. I did.
but you're also launching like a digital publication in an online environment where like eh, social media is not like as helpful to news outlets as it used to be, so it's not like as essential as it once was potentially, but like it still remains like a key way that like publications can reach an audience, right? And like it's something I have to think about a lot here at Prospect as I like do all of our digital stuff, and like I've got to think about like where audiences are and where we can meet them and how we can do journalism on these platforms, right? But at the same time, like same as you, I kind of am very wary and like ambivalent about the effects of these platforms, right? And like they are,
Mhm.
designed by like in some cases like people who literally worked in the gambling industry to be like slot machines, right? And so like, I'm very wary of that. How do you sort of think about the costs and benefits of engaging with this addictive attention economy, like given your experience? And like as a slight subset to that, you've also made the argument about staying on X despite what Elon Musk has done to it, right? So
Mhm.
how do you think about the sort of the necessary evils of engaging with these platforms that are designed to both get you addicted and constantly outraged and in bad arguments rather than the arguments that you're trying to have?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to this. One is I personally have never felt real addiction in any way before I engaged short form video content 2020. I'd like I'm Ethiopian, right? Like I'm Eritrean. Like we have tons of coffee. Like I could like go weeks without drinking coffee and like I would feel completely fine. I don't get headaches or whatever it is. Like alcohol, I can drink alcohol. It's fine. I've smoked weed and like then it's fine. I don't feel like I know people in my life who become like very addicted to stuff and like I've never had that sort of reaction to it. And so like you kind of understand me on an intellectual level where you're like wow like this person's like really like having a problem, but like you don't really get it until I think you have some substance where you do get really drawn to it. And so with TikTok, I mean, and reels and like short form video content in general, it was really a problem where like I was like not even enjoying it. I was just like, I have to scroll for like hours and hours and hours a day. And I read about like it's about breaking my addiction with this with various tools and technologies. I got a dumb phone, so I got rid of my personal iPhone. So I can just use my phone for the things that I think are valuable. I tried various things here, and like a big part of that article is just like I think that we're in this weird space right now where everyone talks about being addicted to like this sorts of social media technology, but we don't like talk about it or engage with it in the way that you would if someone said to you like, "Hey, I'm like addicted to alcohol." Like if someone told you that they were an alcoholic, you wouldn't just go like, "Ha ha, me too." Like, let's get a drink together. Like you just would like you would not engage that way. You would provide them support. There are tons of supports for people who have alcohol issues, and there's like pathways for like reducing your dependency and tools and like social structures that we've created to prevent that. Same thing with drug abuse. All like really abusive substances or people quit heroin all the time. Like they quit these things, right? And we do that by providing them various social supports and ways to do that and public health measures that we've implemented and PSAs and things like that. And so I think to me the first step here with this social media is like awareness that like this is bad, it's a problem, and you should like prevent yourself and people in your life if they seem like they're having a problem. Like don't interact with it like it's a joke. Like right now, like we say I'm addicted to TikTok, and like it's kind of funny, right? But, like, we wouldn't be, like, kind of joking about it if we were, like, talking about, like, heroin. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying those are the same things, but I do think that, like, as, like, socially, we're in a weird place where we're starting to understand the problem, similar to where we were with cigarettes, for instance, in the late 20th century, where, like, there's, like, more and more information coming out about these cigarettes, and it doesn't seem, like, good that people are smoking it, and, like, it doesn't seem like it's healthy, but, like, no one's really made the switch yet. Like, I remember, like, if you watch, like, 90s shows, like Friends, for instance, right? Like, the fact that Chandler Bing is, like, addicted to cigarettes, one of the main characters, is, like, a funny gag. Like, no one's really, like, horrified by no one's like, "You're gonna get lung cancer." Like, it's, like, kind of a joke that he's addicted. He, like, tries to quit, and then he comes back. It's, like, not a big deal. Like, one of the other characters, Jennifer Aniston's character, like, I know way too much about Friends, clearly. I'm, like, just just giving Friends, a trivia now. I think, like, to me, like, this is like a normal kind of like social cycle that we go through where we discover as a society addictive substances, we come to understand them as bad, and then we reframe how we engage with them such that people who want to have some small enjoyment, like someone smoking a cigar, probably not a big deal. Someone going on Twitter every once in a while, someone going on Instagram to share photos of their family or their wedding, like, that's fine stuff. But, like, someone scrolling for like 7 hours a day, clearly there's a problem here. And that kind of moderation, I think, is really important to have with these sorts of substances. And I think it's a societal shift that we're going to go through. But I think that, like, in terms of my own views about how to use these platforms as someone who is in digital media and who's trying to engage in a persuasive project in politics and in culture, yeah, I mean, I think that, like, these are places where you meet people. I think you should go wherever you can to reach people who you think are in your audience. Right now, I don't know if this is true in the UK, but in the United States, like, there is no platform that has a higher density of policymakers than Twitter. There is just nowhere. Like, they are, even to this day, like, even as it's been kind of degraded by Elon Musk, like, you have a platform where I will tweet out a story and I will have US senators responding to that story in my like, you know, that is the kind of place that we're in here. And so to me, voluntarily leaving that for another platform, like, if it's causing you harm, like, you should quit the way that I quit TikTok. Like, that's smart. Like, you should do that. I agree with you. But, like, if it's a place where you can engage productively, like, I think the complete liberal abnegation from Twitter is just, like, ceding the public space to, like, people who you disagree with, and that to me is a big problem.
Jerusalem Demsas, thanks for joining the Prospect Podcast.
You've been watching an interview from the Prospect Podcast. To watch more of our interviews, click here or here, and to listen to this episode in full, click the link in the description below. To read or listen to more of Prospect's journalism, visit prospectmagazine.co.uk.